Yeah, so what I'm going to talk about is the past, the present, and the future of Ethereum. And I'll give you a couple of minutes to round people up before we begin. So basically, let's see. So a little bit about what I've been up to just while we're waiting for people to come to arrive. So around the Ethereum launch 2015, I was the project manager. My official title was release coordinator. And I was based in London as part of the kind of comms and marketing team. Although I had a technical background, I didn't want to move to Berlin. So I was here rather than Berlin for the launch process. Or in London rather than Berlin for the launch process. Most of what I was doing in those days was making sure that the number of bugs in the system slowly reduced over time so that we had a 100% guarantee that we would eventually actually launch. Because when you're trying to do this kind of protocol synchronization work, it's very easy to wind up in a situation where the number of bugs continues to increase over time, at which point your product never launches. So I was there to basically make sure that our consensus converged across all the different platforms and that we would actually get around to releasing something. And that was a big job. Okay, so we're doing? All right, so I will start properly now once whoever's arriving is arriving. All right, so let me start again. So what I'm going to talk about is the past, the present, the future of Ethereum. I guess I've got about 20 minutes. You want me to finish at 3? So this is short, it's a little off the cuff. I wasn't expecting to talk today, but we're doing it. I'm going to start by showing a video from 2015 that will give everybody a sense of what it was the Ethereum Foundation promised people. This is the story that we told about what we were doing, and I think it's really useful as a kind of historical artifact. There we go. So remember, 2015, it's 90 seconds long, and this is what Ethereum was going to be. This is the thing we said we were going to deliver.
How will the internet work in the future? It will use Ethereum. Ethereum is a planetary scale computer powered by blockchain technology. Applications built on Ethereum run exactly as programmed, without any possibility of downtime, censorship, or third-party interference. Ethereum is the secure backbone for everything from e-commerce to the Internet of Things, enabling transparent governance for communities and businesses while keeping user communication secure. Mix, the Ethereum IDE, makes it easy to develop, debug, and deploy your applications, while building UIs is done using your existing web development skills, tools, and favorite frameworks. Ethereum handles user authentication and secure payments for you, as well as messaging and even decentralized storage. And there's no need to sign up or pay for servers to host your applications, as Ethereum is the world's first zero infrastructure platform, allowing your users to regain control over the management of their own funds and personal data. Join the many already developing on Ethereum.
There we go. So that was what we told people we were going to build in 2015. That was the great story of what was going to be created. And I would say that pretty much everything that we told people we were going to do in 2015, we actually did, right? There's been practically no network downtime. The network does handle payments. It does handle identity. It does pretty much everything that we said it was going to do, right? The development tools obviously are at this point archaic. I don't think anybody's ever heard of Mix. There was a fantastically sophisticated piece of technology that the foundation tried to develop called Mist, which was going to be a browser-like way of interacting with Ethereum. We could not get Mist secure, and as a result, Mist was dropped, and what happened instead was MetaMask. MetaMask is much more limited than Mist, but the general flavor is pretty close to what was delivered at a technical level, right? The weird part, however, is the stuff, right? So if you think about what you saw in that video, you saw planes, you saw power stations, you saw a wide variety of big concrete things in the real world. You saw shopping carts, you saw physical things, right? And what's actually happened with Ethereum is that we have largely failed to get into the physical world, right? You can't really buy real estate on chain, you can't really buy much in the way of bonds or stocks. There isn't much in the way of e-commerce for anything more complicated than a t-shirt. Generally speaking, what happened was that we kind of washed up against the real world, and then it washed back, right? The tide kind of got to the wall of the real world, and then the tide rolled back. And what we got, instead of this large-scale transformation of the real world, is we got the creation of a parallel universe. Has anybody here been to ETH Denver? No? So ETH Denver is probably the most parallel universe-y place that I've yet encountered in the Ethereum world. And it's a kind of candy-colored rainbow wonderland filled with people dressed as soft toys, talking about a universe that really only exists as a set of Ethereum smart contracts and their imagination. And you can see this a bit with NFTs, you can see this a bit with DeFi, you can see it a bit with all the kind of utopian promises made by projects which say that they are going to transform society, but actually wind up as 300 investors connected to a DAO where 4 people get together over pizza and beer and then do a bunch of transactions on ledger wallets, right? And so what we have is this enormous imaginal world containing huge amounts of actual wealth, but it's a fairyland, right? It's a bubble world. And the vast majority of the assets inside of the Ethereum world are in the hands of 2 groups. The people that are basically FX speculators who are trading these currencies as just another thing to trade, or we have this kind of candy-colored unicorn wonderland, which is largely made of imaginary financial instruments like NFTs. And as a result, Ethereum has stalled, right? We've seen round after round after round of the spinning up of these enormous imaginary parallel worlds filled with imaginary financial instruments, but every time one of those worlds reaches the end of its liquidity, it crashes and there are no valuable assets left. At peak, OpenSea was doing something like, was it $1 billion a month of transactions? It might have been $10 billion a month of transactions. They raised hundreds of millions of dollars, a valuation of several $billion, because the assumption was that what you were seeing was the NFT market was the beginning of a phenomenon like the general internet. The assumption was that OpenSea was going to become the Amazon of NFTs, and NFTs were going to be integrated into all forms of media. Right? And what actually happened was the liquidity ran out in the system, the NFT world basically blew up, sort of blew up, then dried up and blew away. And what we were left with at the end of that was basically a pile of magic beans. You all know the story of Cinderella, where at midnight the coach and horses turns back into a pumpkin and 4 mice, right? What happens is we keep going through, the transformation of the mice and the pumpkins into the coach and horses, and then we keep seeing blockchain midnight and it all evaporates again. And we've been through, I think, 7 rounds of this cycle. So from my perspective, unless Ethereum figures out how to break this cycle, Ethereum is dead, right? And I don't just mean Ethereum, I mean the blockchain as a whole. If we don't figure out how to break the cycle, eventually what will happen is regulators will say, look, if something was going to happen over there, it would have happened by now. They've had 15 years, 20 years of activity. It's still mostly fraud and imaginary property. We've had enough of this, get rid of it, right? And that is a looming risk, right? Right now, what you see in the EU is MiCA. And MiCA basically says, look, if you're doing anything with the blockchain that involves money, you're a regulated financial institution, get a license, have a nice day. Now, it's not quite that black and white, and there's some room for local variation, but the part of the blockchain which is financial products is being turned into it's just a database and you do finance on it. And the part of the blockchain that is not financial products is either going to wind up heavily licensed, shut down, or socially and culturally marginalized. Because what we've failed to deliver is the kind of heavy-hitting real-world benefit that was the original promise, right? The world that we should have created with Ethereum, and that we still can if we work together and we pull together and we focus, is this. Every valuable thing in the world has a blockchain identity. That's all the institutions, it's all the individuals, and that's exactly like domain names, email addresses, social media accounts. Anybody that is a public figure of any kind has an identity. All big corporations, anybody that does business with the public, anybody that has an enterprise that produces like music, books, whatever it is, if you do anything in the public sphere, You have a social media account, you have a web address, right? Social media account, web address, Ethereum address, Ethereum identity, everything which is real should exist on chain. Thing one. Thing two, all the physical stuff should exist on chain. The houses, the cars, the industrial machine tools, the video cameras, all of that physical stuff should get digital identities. This is very much kind of the Internet of Things vision. Internet of Things never really worked because it was still run sort of by the power companies. It was still run by the electronics manufacturers. They didn't focus on consumers. But if you get a breakthrough like Facebook or Twitter or Amazon for Internet of Things, all of the things wind up with digital identities. When the people, the places, and the things all have digital identities, we can then use artificial intelligence and algorithmic optimization, big data, large statistical analysis to do optimization of the global economy in the same way that airlines do optimization for where they're going to fly their planes. We could do optimization of the global economy in the same way that engineers engineer compilers to optimize the allocation of registers on a processor. We can use artificial intelligence to look at where the stuff is and who wants the stuff and do incredibly efficient matching of things to people and people to places. Rather than going to something like eBay and having people run auctions, you look at the situation globally, you pull all of those pieces together in a single integrated way, and what you get is a what? 2%, 3%, 5%, 8%, 10%, 20% optimization of economic footprint and global GDP. And that sounds impressive, but you know, sea containers, just the act of packing things into big metal boxes before you ship them out for export, sea containers are said to have put 7% on the size of the global economy, just by reducing the amount of delay that you got at ports and reducing the delays when you had to move goods from a ship to a truck. That was 7% of GDP. So imagine, all the people, all the places, and all the things have digital identities. Those digital identities are capable of receiving payments. They can sign legal contracts. Every significant asset in the world has such a digital identity on Ethereum or something similar. Then you can use smart contracts to bind those things together. And when you have to move value between them, you can use algorithms running on, let's say, the cloud. Maybe it's AI, maybe it's statistical analysis, maybe it's some other model. You can do optimization to figure out what the disposition of the world's physical stuff ought to be. And that, as a model, from my perspective, is what Ethereum always promised. That was the 2015 model. If you'd asked me, if Ethereum becomes successful, what will we build? I would have said real estate on-chain, transportation on-chain, liquid markets for ticketing, liquid markets for accommodation, large-scale industrial supply chain adoption so that if you need to buy 20 tons of steel in a hurry, you can buy it from the people around you rather than having it have it shipped from the other side of the world. Factoring of invoices, and I would have said it was a fundamental economic accelerator producing global liquidity. It also would have allowed us to convert finance in two really important ways. Rather than having an economy where you borrow money based on your credit worthiness, you could have an economy where you would borrow money based on your assets. So if you're a factory and you've got $200,000 worth of metal sitting in, shelving, you ought to be able to borrow money against that metal. You also ought to be able to do things like take equity investment much more easily. You want to buy a house, rather than borrowing $70,000 from your relatives to do the down payment and then owing your relatives 70 grand, you take 30% of the value of the house, you split it up among your relatives, they each own a little bit of the equity in your house, and at that point you don't have a loan to pay back, you simply have a partnership agreement with your relatives. And that same kind of principle applies in business. So the world is drowning in bad debt, it's drowning in bad consumer debt. If we convert that debt into equity, we wind up in a position where we can rebuild communities around shared ownership of physical things. And that, to me, is what Ethereum was. And it's what Ethereum is in tiny little corners, and it's what the future of Ethereum should be. We should be building a world where the people, the places, and the things all have digital identities. Those digital identities should allow for algorithmic optimization so that we don't do things like auction stuff on eBay. We can actually find the people that really want it and need it. you get the best possible price for your goods. We can use statistical analysis to pull all of the needless waste out of the global economy. That could be worth a huge amount of money. It could also cut our environmental footprint by 10 or 20%. And then when we start talking about the financial structures, secured lending at low interest rates against physical assets should be easy, and it should be easy to liberate equity in physical assets, particularly real estate, as a way of taking some of this enormous unsustainable debt and converting it into equity. And that is what the blockchain should be doing right now. That's what we should be focusing on, not the creation of imaginary forms of property like virtual real estate and NFTs. NFTs have a role in the world. They represent physical ownership of assets. They can also operate as things like patent licenses or intellectual property licenses. There is a role for NFTs. There is also a role for tokens. All those tokens that were kind of pioneered back in the 2018 period, if those things were correctly legally bound to equity in buildings, you could go buy tokens that represented ownership of the stuff in your community, and if your community does well economically, your tokens become worth a lot of money. And it allows people to invest in their communities because you've got the ability to put money directly into the community around you because the real estate is tokenized. So, you know, we really are at a position where, like they say, like Amazon says, every day is day zero, right? Every day is the first day, every day is the beginning, right? I've put basically at this point, I started Ethereum in 2017, so I put 6 years of my life into solving the legal problems so that we can finally get Ethereum to the physical world as promised. That company is called Ethereum. And we always viewed it as being kind of like a device driver. You know, here is Ethereum, it's the software layer, there's a physical device driver that lets you talk to the physical world. And kind of like, you know, oracles allow you to read from the physical world, it was like an oracle that let you write to the physical world. So I've been working on the infrastructure to solve this problem for 6 years. We've been doing live client transactions for 2.5 years. It actually works. But what, you know, I want to see now, and what I think we need now, is the cultural change to say, okay, we've had, since 2015, Ethereum has largely been inward facing. Mostly it's been, what can we do with this technology? And most of the people using those goods and services are people that are also working in the field. Now what we need to do is turn to face outwards. There is a community called ReFi, the regenerative finance people. They are beginning to face outwards in a pretty disciplined way. They're looking at climate change, they're looking at real estate, there's a community there. There are people working on transport. There's a long string of companies that are doing things that look like Uber, but they use the blockchain. I think that stuff is excellent. But what does it take for us to turn around and go from inward facing, where we're looking at our blockchain and our technology and our smart contracts, to go to be outward facing and say, look, here's the real world, here are all the obstacles to the real world. We finally have enough regulatory stuff around things like MiCA in the EU to get a 500 million person integrated market for blockchain services. That should be enough to build real companies. Let's go and turn towards the real world, embrace the real world, and fix the real world, because that was the original Ethereum promise. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. I was actually just about to kill the sound on that one because my calendar will go off then. Well, we still have a couple minutes, if I'm not wrong. Are there any questions, any like points for discussion? Anyone wants to? Yeah, there is a mic coming from the back.
Yeah, I think I've heard of things like intent casting before, where you can, like, customers can accurately project what they want. But when it comes to smaller and smaller things, it probably hits a fuzzy area of trying to manage someone not getting what they meant. Or is this just meant for like large scale things first?
So I think it's an AI problem. You know, if you could get the legals to work for an apartment at $200,000, getting it to work for a bike at $200 is basically a case of making the legal processes 1,000 times cheaper. And I think if we went and talked to the AI folks, we would find 1,000 startups that say they're going to make legal processes cheap using AI. So, you know, where I'm working right now is mostly big chunky objects because, you know, like I run a company, big chunky objects is kind of where you go first. But I have with me, I don't have it with me today, but I'll bring it tomorrow. I have a camera demo, which is a 10-year-old camera, which is worth about $150, with an Ethereum digital signature generating physical tag. So you scan the tag on your phone, it does an Ethereum digital signature using a private key which is buried in the tag, it validates the thing, and then it loads you up an NFT, and if you buy the NFT, you become the legal owner of the camera. Now, that was a hand-constructed prototype, but it's only an accident in history that we don't have 1,000 very high-end outdoor jackets designed by a boutique firm with those chips in them right now. There was a couple of things that just didn't quite connect when we needed them to. The project got shelved, but we can do physical stuff, right? And those tags are manufactured by a company called ARX, ARX. They're what are behind a lot of the T-shirt projects, but they've got a good enough security guarantee that you could do things that were worth $10,000 on those tags, and it'd probably be okay. So combination of digital tagging to identify the stuff, and then automated or semi-automated legals, because the AI people are putting, $100 billion a year into AI research, and law is a great target area. I think in 3 years it won't even look like a problem. I think it'll just work. And the synergy between blockchains and AI is enormous, because a blockchain is a place where an AI can do a transaction in a way that it can't, because Visa will not let an AI have a credit card, but nobody can stop an AI having a private key.
We're on time. We already stalled the slots. But thank you so much, Vinay, again.